Hi, I'm Ryan Merriman. I play the role of Kevin Fisher, the good-looking action hero who starts off in his own world and ends up learning a valuable lesson about life.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Ashlyn.
And we're the popular girls.
We're the pretty girls.
We're sexy.
We're tanned.
We're cute.
I'm the pretty brunette. You know, the kind of not as pretty as the blonde, but close.
And I'm the beautiful blonde girl. I'm blonde, right?
You're blonde.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Frankie Cheeks, sleazebag cockface voyeur.
I play Erin. I am the goth, angry, mad girl who's just really mad.
This is Texas Battle. I play Louis Romero. Yes, the jock and the asshole, but you definitely gotta love me. And I do live 3/4 of the way through the movie. Black man ain't dying first in this one. Trust me, all about the black man.
Hi, my name's Amanda Crew, and I play Julie Christensen, the sister of the smart, perfect heroine that no one thought could save the world, not even just the world, but me.
Ian is the voice of the audience. There's certain convenient things that filmmakers write into movies that don't necessarily make a lot of sense. And the characters in the movie seem to buy into it anyways, even though a lot of the audience thinks, well, that's kind of kooky. Well, you know, Ian calls them on that. And you usually find him somewhere in a movie. And in this movie, he looks like me.
I'm Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and I play Wendy, the smart, virginal girl who has the vision.
I started to see a lot of movies that had the very same plot, and I realized the plot came down to this. The movie begins with a lot of living teenagers, and then it ends with all of them dead, except for one, who is necessary to come back in the sequel and tell the story about what happened last summer. So I realized that these plots basically come down to killing teenagers, so that's why I called them the Dead Teenager movie.
When Roger Ebert reviewed the first Final Destination, he sort of applied the moniker Dead Teenager Movie, which is, you know, as evidenced by all these movies practically, a bunch of teenagers get together in either a finite location or with a finite situation, and they're each picked off one by somebody out to kill them. Okay, it's worked for hundreds of years. It's always going to work. However, I think that they're called Dead Teenager movies because they appeal to teenagers, and teenagers are the people who go see these movies. Teenagers are the very ones who actually like being scared. They like putting themselves in harm's way. They're testing the boundaries of what they can and can't do.
Somebody there?
And these movies tap into that bravery and weird fear that they want to experience without truly putting themselves at risk. So I have no problem with the moniker of Dead Teenager Movie. In fact, if you look at FT2, we tried to break apart from that by having all the teens that we are introduced in the first 15 minutes get killed. Interesting intellectual exercise, but ultimately I think the movie probably would have done better had it just been teenagers.
We need to help each other in order to get through this.
The second movie, I think they were trying something different and seeing if they can broaden the franchise a little bit. I feel like they had no reason to be together, you know, besides this event, which is a horrific highway crash. I felt like it was a little bit, in a way, in some ways, a little bit contrived that they got back together. Maybe that's not because of age, but because of the incident itself, the accident itself, that you're coming from all different places, you know, and you're on this road for a moment. And I think they had an answer for it when all the characters somehow were related to the first one in some way.
One night, I'm in Paris, and all of a sudden, this dude, out of nowhere, just gets whacked by this falling sign.
But we felt like in the third one, we wanted to bring it back to high school kids, particularly for high school kids at graduation, that they were about to move on to different things. They were about to be released into the world, into adulthood. And I wanted to deal with that a little bit, where these kids are ready to see their whole life ahead of them and see it shut down because of this incident.
And I think people's fear of roller coasters, like this fear of you're losing control. You know, as a teenager, you're losing control of your body and your social situation, and you know, you're gonna be thrown out in the world, and although it seems like you'd have more control, you don't. So I think that Freddy or Michael Myers, or even if you can't see our death, they're symbols or personification of adulthood and your fears of sexuality and all that shit that you can't deal with as a teenager rolled into one coming at you. You can deal with it in a safe, dark movie theater.
You know what really scared me, truly, and I'm not kidding, was I was an engineering intern before I went to college at General Dynamics. And spending a summer there, working as in, seeing how engineers worked, what they did. I was facing that for my whole life, and that scared the hell out of me.
An awful lot of urban legends focus on teenagers and teenage horrors. This is probably because teenagers occupy a very specific place within society. There's a lot being expected of them and demanded of them. They're supposed to get good grades. They're supposed to behave in an upright and positive manner. They're not supposed to be having sex or doing anything strange or taking substances. No, 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 no. So I think a lot of urban legends comment on this place that teenagers occupy within society. They are really, in reality, concerned about sex and school, getting into the right college, yet sometimes they can't necessarily express these issues, and they instead become these other horrors they're not truly concerned about in their lives, like this boogeyman or this anonymous strange killer that could come take them. And sometimes these legends are really talking about something else. So for example, you have the Hook. And the Hook is a timeless urban legend at this point, from the middle of the last century. And everybody knows it, every adolescent girl in particular. In this story, you have a boy and a girl necking in a car on some kind of deserted lover's lane when they hear on the radio that some guy with a hook for a hand has escaped from a lunatic asylum and is going around killing people. So they drive away, and when they get home, they notice that there's a hook in their car door. This is all about sex, right? Because the car pulls out and there's this hook left hanging. So, this is really not talking about a killer, it's talking about sex. You could look at the story on the literal level, don't do something you're not supposed to, but there's always another level or multiple levels to look at in these kinds of narratives.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the latest one, for some reason scared me so much because I didn't know it was a true story.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths. The events of that day were to lead to one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I had to go home to an empty apartment, and I was scared of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I think it just hit me harder because it was a true story.
Test, test, test. Okay, this is August 20th, 1973. The time is 3:47 p.m.
There's a lot of things that make urban legends seem very real. Sometimes there's circumstantial evidence linking what's occurring in the legend to real space, real time. Another thing is there's a lot of specificity of detail, sometimes names, dates, places. So you certainly have writers and directors picking up on urban legends, but at the same time, people then will see these urban legends or hear about them from film.
You're all gonna die. I cannot speak as a historian because I wouldn't know if this is correct, that this is the first film in which teenagers were aimlessly maimed. But for me, and I think for many of us who study the genre, Texas Chainsaw was a defining moment when it was all right and you would still sell tickets to have a film that killed teenagers. In the 60s, that would have really made it difficult for you at the box office. I mean, first of all, the slasher genre, in any case, doesn't expect a lot of respect, but it's an independent film. And so, there were less self-censorship. And then once it became so popular, and now it's a cult film, then I think it encouraged a lot of imitations.
The beginning of this particular cycle was probably Halloween, which I thought was a very good movie. And so did Siskel, who saw it at midnight at the Chicago Film Festival and then called a cab to take himself home, and he lived only 2 blocks away from the theater because he was so frightened. He told me that story so often, I guess it must have been true. Halloween was a good film, but like all good films, it inspired a lot of films that were not so good and that cheapened its original artistry into kind of a formula that just consisted of chasing and victimizing women.
when Friday the 13th came out, that's the one that really got the formula down, and that's the one that gave birth to a constant and endless stream of imitations, because that really was the dead teenager movie. It was a bunch of kids, camp counselors, out in the woods, isolated setting, and for an hour and a half, the audience watching these characters get killed in creative, bloody ways.
We did a show called The Woman as Victim that caused a lot of comment at the time, pointing out that a new visual style had started to be used in which the camera stalked the woman. Previously, the camera would identify with the woman, and we would flee with her. Now the camera identified with the killer instead of empathizing with the victim, and we thought that was not really a very healthy development. And there was a whole group of movies where women were victims, and the whole plot involved them being chased and terrorized and slashed and killed.
In horror films, the last survivor is often referred to as the final girl because it's usually a female. The term final girl is coined by Carol Clover in a book called Men, Women, and Chainsaws. And the final girl shares the emotional center with the monster, with the killer, but she is the main character, she is our protagonist, she's our surrogate. And in the end, she's the one who finds the dead bodies, figures out that something's wrong, figures out who the killer may be, and then has to run from the killer, usually a him. But she also then begins to fight back, and in the end, she survives. Although the main audience of the slasher horror, is young males, these young male audiences identified not only with the male killer, but Clover argued that in fact the males in the audience identified with this final girl, and that they first identified with the victimization of her and then identified with her eventual victory. So that's the importance of the final girl, is that identification is across the gender divide.
I asked somebody at New Line once why they gave us clips for our show of movies that they knew that we would probably dislike. And he said, because it's publicity for the movie and they get to see a clip from the film. And the kids are thinking, well, of course, those guys don't like the movie, but it looks like I might enjoy it, or I want to see a stupid movie. And frequently, people will very willingly go to movies they expect to be bad, but they're very cautious about going to see movies that they fear might be good. This is peculiar.
I always enjoy sitting in a theater and seeing the New Line logo come up, because this is a company that has real independent roots. And, making films for, not the film snobs, but making films for middle America and the horror fans out there. Right from the beginning, the president of the company, Bob Shea, showed an interest in horror film. He's a businessman, and he realizes that this is the bread and butter of the company. He started out by re-releasing the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. From the producers of A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Then he really hit pay dirt with Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984.
From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes.
Nightmare on Elm Street took the slasher formula, but they added a whole fantasy element to it, the whole dreamscape thing. The Freddy could kill us in our sleep. They just didn't throw them on the screen. They wanted to come up with new and elaborate ways to entertain and shock an audience. And the Final Destination series is the latest example of that.
In my opinion, a horror movie has an element of the supernatural in it. And for people to say Friday the 13th and movies like that are horror movies, I disagree. For the most part, the first part of that franchise is a guy killing people. That's a thriller. There's nothing supernatural ultimately about it. It's just a guy killing people. How is that different than Hannibal Lecter? How is that different than any of those other movies? Those aren't horror movies. They're thrillers. And yet there's a component of action in the Final Destination franchise because of the way death metes out its vengeance. So for me, Final Destination 3 is a supernatural thriller.
People are always quick to say, well, it's a horror movie, it's a thriller. And a lot of the times I feel like there's a marriage of so many different elements. Like, you have these very macabre kind of scary things happening, but then you've got these crazy stunt sequences going on. Ryan Merriman in this scene we were just shooting, and there's real pieces of debris falling on us, and he's picking me up, and it's like, it's a total Vin Diesel moment for him. It's not a horror or a thriller or an action, it's actually a blend of all three.
The thing that I can't keep up with is that the fans of these movies become students of them. and they get the DVDs, and they look at all the documentaries, the making of. The people who read Fangoria or other magazines like that, it used to be that a kid would run down the aisle screaming in fear. Now they're saying, boy, Rick Baker really did a good job on that effect. They know who does the makeup. They know how the CGI works. They've maybe done something on their own computers. They've studied it in school. And so they objectify it. And so it isn't necessarily plain as violence for them. It's plain as an artificial experience that they can analyze.
Back in the late 70s, makeup effects artists like Tom Savini, Rick Baker, Rob Bottin were revolutionizing special makeup effects. They could do things with latex, blood packs, and hiding tubing, and the effects artists became more popular than the actors in these movies. Fangoria at the time made them out to be the rock stars of the new wave of horror film and showed how these films were made and inspired a whole new generation of special effects artists as well. I'm always running into people today who say, hey, I grew up on your magazine, I read how Dick Smith did his blood formula, and it inspired me to go into the movie business.
3, 2, 1, go!
For better or for worse, I've become known as the go-to guy for bloodshed and mayhem on this set.
Did that pass the blood test?
No, it did not pass the blood test. There was a lot of aerosol in the air, and for me, we want more chunky goodness. It's really born out of, when I kind of became interested and enjoyed horror movies. It was all during the 80s, all of, Freddy's and the Friday the 13th and all those, slice and dicers. So I have a real affinity and understanding of what that audience wants. But I guess scary movies always work for me because I like the feeling of being scared. I think it's interesting to see what scares people. What scares me and what scares somebody else, they may be totally different, but there's a common ground of things that scare everybody that I find if you can tap into that, the movie will be a success. I think Final Destination, the whole franchise taps into that. What if you might die today? How is that going to happen? Could you stop it? And have you done something that might actually be facilitating that death? When we did a preview for FD2, there's that terrible elevator sequence. The woman's head gets corkscrewed off. A bunch of kids were actually out waiting to the elevators to go down to the parking lot after the movie, and the elevator doors opened, and they stopped halfway, and opened and stopped, and they were all sort of looking at, fuck that! And they all went for the stairs, and it's that moment like, the movie works. And it works, kid, because they're scared shitless. It works.
I think Final Destination is undoubtedly a dead teenager movie in the way that there's teenagers, and they die, and that's what the movie's about. It can't escape that genre.
It follows the same idea in a way that the characters are teenagers. They each have their own very distinct personality that fits in very well to a lot of teen plots. We've got the hot ditzy girls, the sleazy guy.
Hey, don't hate, all right? Don't be a hater.
But it's true, that's teenage life, that's high school.
I find that so many scripts are written for, a younger target, which is fine, but you really got to go there. You really have to have interesting characters, cool characters, characters that kids can relate to. And I think Jim, I hate using the word hip, but I think he really gets it. He gets what older teens like to see, you know what I mean? Like lines that are actually really funny, lines that 18 and older laugh at.
Okay, who was sitting behind us on the roller coaster? Oh, wait, wasn't it that one guy who got voted most likely to become manager at Red Lobster?
Oh, no, you know what? God, I remember. There was this guy, black cloak. I didn't see his face, but the ride attendant did take his sickle. Obviously we don't want to completely piss off the youth of America by getting too smart with anything, but it allows its characters to be a little bit more philosophical than your average horror movie, because this isn't some slasher with a grudge against hot chicks with big tits. This is death we're talking about here. It causes young people to think about this very abstract idea that death is coming for me, and to not think about it in the way that, like, well, if we can only get away from this murderer, well, we'll be fine. But they're actually contemplating this weird god brain plotting their demise, having really no way to control it, stop it, or to know necessarily what it's going to do next.
If you feel that there's nothing you would die for, then the underside of that is also true, which is that there's really nothing that you are living for. And I think sometimes young people today are not sure what it is that they would die for, and therefore what is it that makes life meaningful.
That's the last photograph Lincoln posed for. The photographic plate was broken, causing a line that can't be removed. exactly where he was shot.
So these films that have these killing forces are occasions to think of those questions. They don't actually offer solutions at all, but they are occasions in which young people can work on those feelings and maybe express them a little bit.
Yes, death design.
We're not taking it that seriously, you know. These movies are so preposterous that to me they're black comedies. And so the idea of death coming is not really done, you know, like a real master horror teller would tell. I see them as thrillers, and the audience gets a giggle out of the preposterous way that the person's going. You want to watch somebody pass away of cancer, that's horrible, it's tragic. Where this is like a roller coaster explodes or whatever it does. You don't have to have a sense of guilt over getting a kick out of watching it.
There's a tradition, obviously, in horror movies, more traditionally in the slasher genre, which we were going out of our way to avoid, in the fact that we have no official killer. We have no Freddy Krueger, we have no Jason. And so the idea of making a sequel was even more unlikely. But once I was forced to do it, because of the financial bounty that was waiting for us if we were successful, I think what happens is the audience knows that someone's going to die. They just don't know when and how. That became the recurring character, Death, and that became the franchise.
Now, let us hope for some lightning.
Fuck you, Ben Franklin.
If you think of Procter & Gamble, they invented Ivory soap. Now, okay, everybody knows Ivory soap, so next year they don't have to invent another name because they still have Ivory soap. What would they do if they had to invent a new soap every year and sell it? Well, it's the same with the studios, because they're selling you Final Destination movies as a trademark, as a brand. And if you saw the other one, now you want to see this one because you know more or less exactly what you're going to get.
We've seen one shocking scene in one movie, then when you go see the sequel, it has to top what you saw in the previous film. So I've also been surprised how sadistic some of these films are becoming and what they're getting away with. It's a case of one-upmanship now with the Hollywood filmmakers. How far can we go before the audience has had enough and is just totally disgusted and doesn't want to see these films anymore?
And now we're like going, kill them all.
159 Charlie, take 4.
Having written one in 1999 and writing one in 2005, there's been Columbine and 9/11. I think everybody's more scared or everybody's more cynical. The way you wrote the kids, it just seems like a meaner world than when you did this 6 years ago. It's just a totally different tone, even in the way the characters talk to each other, the slang that's arisen, the attitude. It's just, hey, bitch, hey, fucker, hey, you know, and it wasn't that way. Yeah. Well, I don't know what can stop it, but that's what it feels like.
Today, people are more afraid, more cautious, less secure than they used to be. I grew up when you didn't even lock the door to the house before you went to sleep at night. And we've lost that world, but we've lost it maybe not so much in real terms as in our minds, because the news and the movies and television keep telling us, you're not safe, you're not safe. And so it's changed the way we behave. And then because we think that way, we go to these movies as an exorcism, because as long as it's happening to the screen, it's happening to somebody else. And I don't know, I think there should be a period in life when you feel immune, when nothing can hurt you, when nothing scares you, when you're going to live forever. And we all lose that, but I'm not sure that we should lose it any sooner than necessary.